All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Patrick Ray of CanopyBoulder, and welcome to the CanopyBoulder Growth Incubator Demo Day. What is our Growth Incubator? Well, this is a project, an investment project that we've done over the last month and a half or so, where we've invested in 3 companies in the cannabis tech space, and they're all growing, fast growing. And we wanted to work with them over a compressed amount of time to see if we could make an impact on their business. So making an investment and trying to make an impact with our efforts and the community around them. And so far, so good. So we're excited to have them on today to present. But before that, we get to their presentations, we want to have Katherine Greiner, Vireo Health, and Alfred Miranda, formerly of MedMen, join us for our cannabis tech panel. Then we're going to go into those demo day presentations from Elevated Signals, one of the fastest growing tech companies in cannabis in Canada, Abaca, an internet bank, fintech company that's growing rapidly in the industry, and MSOs and licensed businesses are really leaning into what they're offering for banking services. In Trym, a cultivation and farm, cannabis farm management platform from California. So, and then we'll wrap up with our Futurecasting panel keynote. Sorry, not a panel, but a keynote Q&A with Alan Brochstein of New Cannabis Ventures and 420 Investors. So we're gonna move fast, and I'm sure you don't want to miss anything. So feel free, giving you the right to turn off your email, text, and Slack channels for the next hour or so as we go through this content. So let's kick things off with the cannabis and technology discussion. You know, tech is having its moment in cannabis, and our tech companies are thriving amidst COVID-19. And you're going to hear from 3 of them shortly. Before that, let's talk to the demand side of the equation and hear from a few MSO executives with responsibility for assessing and selecting technologies for their cannabis businesses. Moderating this panel is going to be Celia Daly, our Director of Development and Operations. Celia, it's all yours.
Sorry about that, I'm still muted. Awesome, thank you, Patrick. And thanks everyone so much for being here. As Patrick mentioned, I'm Celia Daly. I'm the Director of Development and Operations for CanopyBoulder. We're really glad you're here. So this is awesome. So I think this year has been pretty challenging across the board. I think we can all agree on that. And yet cannabis seems to be doing okay. And a lot of that is led, it seems, by some of these larger sort of MSO type vertically integrated organizations. And you know, here at Canopy, we do a lot with sort of ancillary tech. We're thinking a lot about technology in cannabis, and it sort of got us thinking about how these large organizations are using technology to deal with these challenges. So we put together an awesome panel for you all. And thank you guys so much for being here. So I want to start off and introduce Katherine Greiner. Katherine's been in health and wellness for a long time, but her expertise is really in sort of digital marketing and e-commerce, primarily around sort of consumer and direct-to-consumer products. Katherine's now the Director of CRM and Loyalty at Vireo, which is a large MSO. They actually just doubled their footprint in Minnesota. They're about to open 4 new dispensaries, so we're excited for them. So Katherine, thanks so much for being here. And we also have Alfred Miranda. He's a leader in cannabis tech. He's contributed to the growth of a few different cannabis companies over the year with his tech expertise, including Acerage Holdings, MedMen, and marijuana packaging. He's held the positions of CTO, head of tech, and senior director of mobile and cloud-based engineering. And I also want to give a really quick shout out to the Cannabis team, which is a premier executive search and staffing firm in cannabis for helping us get connected with Alfred. So Alfred, thanks so much for being here. All right, you guys are both muted. Let's unmute you so that we can have a good conversation. Great, awesome. It's so great to have you guys here. So I want to, really quick before we jump into questions, there is a Q&A. I can't promise we're gonna get to everybody's questions, but if you wanna drop questions in as we're talking that sort of will keep our discussion moving, please feel free to do that. And let's go ahead and kick it off. So My first question is, there's a lot of tech in cannabis. Some of it's made specifically for this industry, some of it's sort of brought in from outside industry, and it's obviously a really broad topic and it applies to various sort of parts of the business. But at a really high level, I'm hoping you guys can kind of walk me through, what does a decision-making process look like? Like, how are you all choosing technology and choosing what parts of the business to deploy it in? I think I'm gonna kick it off with Alfred, and then we'll hear from Katherine too. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
You can.
Okay, excellent. First of all, I'd like to thank CanopyBoulder for having me, Celia, Patrick. Hopefully this goes as well as everyone's expecting. In relation to your question, for me, it really is about the broadness and maturity of technology. What I try to look for aren't things that are specific to cannabis. I try to, I don't want to say stay away from, but with everything that we're trying to accomplish, especially as an MSO or dispensary groups, from seed to sale, there's a lot of intricate factors and scalability that comes into play. So for me, it's really important that integration, long-term vision, and scalability is taken into consideration. Just because it has a cannabis-specific name doesn't necessarily mean it's going to meet the needs of the business.
Okay, I have follow-up questions for you, but let's, I want to hear from Katherine first.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Alfred.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise. So I agree with everything you say. For me, from a marketing and sales side, and being a part of a company that's really trying to be digital forward and kind of push the envelope there, everything needs to be extremely compliant. I'm sorry, there's an airplane flying overhead right now. But we're looking for compliance in all of the states that we operate in. Also, being a medical company, when appropriate, we need technology that is HIPAA compliant as appropriate. But when I say compliant in every state, I'm looking at making sure that they understand rules and regulations on a state-by-state basis. So when I'm looking at a loyalty program that is SMS-based, are you making sure that every single text message has a reply stop at the end of it? Is that built into your technology? And as Alfred was saying, some of the newer technology doesn't always have that right out of the gate. So that's the first thing I ask. And then also, being an MSO, do you operate in every state that we operate in? And that's often not the case. So if it's not, then I'm looking for critical mass. And that usually is a tipping point in that decision as well.
You bring up an interesting point about compliance, and I know Alfred and I actually talked about this recently, sort of the difference between a compliant technology and compliance technology, right? And Alfred, that was a great conversation we had. I wonder if you could kind of elaborate a little bit on that, and then maybe Katherine has some thoughts too.
Sure, absolutely. Compliance is a distinguishing factor in our industry. And there's a couple of factors at play here. So when I look at technology, especially when they consider themselves compliant, that just means that they integrate with the state system. That does not mean that they're a fully, truly compliant system. There's a lot of intricate factors to compliance that need to be considered. What you can do operationally to make compliance a little bit easier. I can go over some of those things later from a technology perspective, but just integrating with the state system does not make you compliant. Also HIPAA, as Katherine mentioned, that is a huge factor. I know that there are some very large MSOs, and technology companies out there that don't feel the need to follow HIPAA just because cannabis is still Schedule I and not federally legal. But at the point that it does become federally legal, the cost of that switchover is going to be significant. So planning for the future with HIPAA is essential to start day one. And then finally, from a compliance perspective, there's SOX. All cannabis companies have the vision of eventually going public. Well, SOX compliance is something that's also a factor that needs to come into play. So it's really important when talking about technology to really be able to alleviate the concern around compliance more than just some marketing terminology saying we're a compliance system just because we do integration.
That's great. And kind of adding on to that, Alfred, you speak about integration. That is another key factor that we consider. We are using so many different tools. Some of them are cannabis specific and some of them are not. And in those cases where they are cannabis specific, are they willing to work with us as true partners and build a custom API integration so that we can have as many systems as possible speak with each other? You know, as I'm sure you're aware, in some states, the governance of those states will not allow us to integrate with the state mandated point of sale system. So that creates some considerations. So where I can eliminate that kind of a consideration and make everything seamless, that's going to appeal greatly to me.
Yeah, I think Katherine brings up a really good point around integration, because a lot of the niche players really don't do a great job with integration because they're hoping to capture that functionality in their roadmap down the line, and integration becomes somewhat costly. Now, there are states that force all dispensary groups or MSOs to utilize their platform to integrate with the state as a go-between. I'm hoping, and I've worked in the past before with states, to try to bypass that altogether and just integrate directly with the states. There really is no need to have a go-between, and sometimes that poses more problems than it's worth.
So, I mean, it sounds like, you know, and I don't think this is news to anyone, that this sort of usage needs to be super appropriate. And that seems like number one on the priority, and then sort of ease of use is in there too. I wonder, and I know that we've sort of touched on this a little around compliance and HIPAA and kind of regulatory, but I wonder if you guys can speak a little bit to how regulations and maybe even the changing of regulations, right? Because they change so fast, impacts kind of the need for this technology and what kinds of technology you're looking at?
Sure, I'll start. So I look at our industry as an industry that really needs a creative kind of catalyst behind the people involved. Compliance poses its challenges, and there are aspects, as you know, we had spoken before, Celia, around 280E, where you have to look at the business overall and try to figure out where we can improve operational efficiencies so that we can bring down operational overhead and save money, because we're in a circumstance where it's a challenge as an industry because we're not able to function as a regular business. So where do you save money? Well, you save money where you can appropriately operationalize and streamline your business. For me, I'm not a technology first person. I'm an operations first person. If the processes and the operational processes are in place and efficiencies are in place, it's easier to implement technology. Technology isn't always the answer. But kind of coming back to your question in terms of what it is that companies are looking for, they're looking for a way that they can collect data appropriately across the entire seed to sale channel and make decisions based on that data. Right now, as an industry, we do a horrible job of collecting data. It's a hodgepodge. A lack of integration across different systems doesn't allow for us to see the whole picture, only parts of it. And even then, is that data even accurate? So I spend a significant amount of my time really kind of pushing technology from an ERP perspective, soup to nuts, looking at opportunities where you can make the grow more effective, collect data about the grow, maintain consistency and quality, where you can work with manufacturing, make manufacturing simpler, fewer post-it notes and more automation, looking at things like the distribution channels where you're dealing with vendors and procurement and wholesaling, and then ultimately inventory and the retail process to make the customer impact better. So from a technology perspective, it's really looking at all those pieces and how they all kind of talk to each other.
That's interesting. Katherine, do you? Yeah.
No, that was a very thorough answer. And I think this was implied in Alfred's response. Eliminating redundancies is another big consideration. There is an eagerness for many of these tools to say that they provide this sort of data or that dashboard, but those usually come at an incremental cost of the use of the tool. And it's very easy to, on the client side, to become eager about the amounts of data that's being sent your way without having the proper systems in place to analyze it, to gain insights from it, and actually have actionable items come out of that. So for me, I'm also constantly asking, where does this data already live and exist in our ecosystem? Do I need this feature? Is that redundant? How can I trim back on the terms of service and the contract with them? Are they willing to work with me on that so that we can keep everything really simple as much as possible?
Yeah. And what's unfortunate is a lot of third-party software providers, you have to read the fine print closely, but they end up owning the data. And they end up owning the customer experience, which nobody wants at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys both bring a sort of a similar point about the actual setup and design of this. You know, Alfred, you're sort of talking about the process and the operation. So, you know, I think both, you know, when we're talking about MSOs, we're talking about enterprise level software, right? Enterprise level technology. How much of the services that you choose are designed, ready to go out of the box, have a process in place, have those sort of, as Katherine spoke to, those sort of actionable, here's your report, and how much of it do you want to be customized for your existing process? Like, where's that line between sort of setting up a process for the technology and having a technology bring you a process?
I've been in technology for a long time, inside and outside of cannabis. I have never implemented a solution that worked out of the box.
I agree.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Katherine.
I was going to say, for us specifically, it's unique in that a lot of the best solutions are they come from the Western states, in the more rec states, and we're trying to kind of retrofit them to a medical environment. So I'm lucky if something's 80% of the way there.
Yeah, it's unfortunate too, because data is so important, and there's a lot of, you have to learn how to understand what the marketing speak is, as opposed to what is really there. I have not implemented a system that that has worked really well out of the box. Even systems I've developed myself require customization at the end of the day, and then they end up being very specific to a company, so they aren't even technically reusable in that way. So it is a bit of a challenge.
So I guess I wonder, are there experiences you've had, and we don't necessarily need to name specific products, but are there experiences you've had that have been really successful, and sort of what made those successful for you all?
Yeah, we've actually recently had the pleasure of working on an integration with a partner that was extremely eager to learn from our marketing strategies and our marketing goals. You know, I'm very, very fortunate in that the team that I work with comes from a variety of different backgrounds. And so we have that experience from outside the cannabis industry and can come in and say, well, you know, this, and this technique would work really well in this industry. And these partners that were cannabis specific hadn't necessarily considered these other options, but were very, very open-minded to them, and immediately built in some solutions into their product roadmap and delivered on those promises. So there are those partners out there that are willing to work with you because they understand the implications for their own business and their own.
Alfred?
Yeah, at MedMen, I was very fortunate because although it was a fast-growing company, the executive leadership was really interested in getting a handle of the entire supply chain. So we implemented an ERP solution there, and at the same time worked very closely with the operations team. The operations team worked to streamline their processes as we were working through the implementation, basically implementing technology that was state-of-the-art in the industry. In MedMen's grow facilities, we implemented RFID readers to track plants as they moved from room to room. We implemented automation, which saved about 35% of operational overhead in terms of time and energy, manufacturing as well. And then we custom built a point of sale system called MedMen 2.0 that really was highly state of the art at the time and absolutely necessary, because there was no point of sale system at the time that was fully compliant. I believe that that's point of sale system at MedMen is still the only fully compliant point of sale system that's out there. So these implementations were large. They had to be fast. It was a marriage of a team of really capable ops people, compliance people, developers, a really strong project management team, and the support of the entire company. And I did something very similar at Acreage. So both of those were very successful because we had support top down.
So it's interesting, you know, we have a question that just came in here, which I think is relevant to what you're talking about, sort of what integrations are important. So I know Katherine talked about redundancy, making sure that we're not redundant, and considering quite sort of at the top of the list of priorities and decision-making criteria, the ability for products to integrate. So where are there areas specific in sort of Katherine, you know, the sales marketing sort of side of things, and Alfred, you know, across the whole business, where those integrations are really key and are sort of top priority when looking at how technologies cross over?
Sure. From a sales and marketing side, it's kind of the big ones. You know, if you have a retail store and you're also wanting to take that retail experience online for e-commerce experience, you want your in-store POS to integrate with whatever your e-commerce solution is. That's pretty tricky in some states. But again, you work with what you can. And then additionally, if you're a larger business and you're really wanting to begin to understand your customer and their sales patterns and segment your customer appropriately, you want to have a CRM in place. So hopefully your POS and or your e-commerce system integrates with your POS. And that also extends to your content management systems, your loyalty programs, all of those other items that you might stack on top, your ESPs.
Yeah, I think Katherine's correct. I look at all the opportunities for integration, and there are so many that you really want to try to integrate as much as you can with the systems to each other, as well as to your own internal systems. I think loyalty is a big factor. I think that tying security with marketing is also big, because you're able to see hotspots within the store that will allow you to do product placement a little bit better. There's a lot of opportunity across the board. And for me, I kind of look at it this way. I really see the whole technology ecosystem within a company as kind of a living organism. And the more data you could potentially feed it, the better the outcome is going to be. You know, you create an appropriate channel, and eventually you're collecting enough data where the system itself begins to monitor the data and actually make recommendations to you based on those data, on that data that you've collected. So there's a lot of opportunities for integration, and it's almost worth the investment to have one or two developers just integrating systems almost full time, because that does become almost a full-time job.
That's an interesting approach. What about, I mean, I think Alfred, you mentioned, you know, it takes time. getting this stuff to sort of really work for you sort of takes time. What are you guys looking at in terms of ROI? And, when are you sort of expecting, I know it takes time, integrate it, set it up for your processes, all of that takes time. So like, where is the point where you're like, this needs to be sort of running, working, no longer being worked on? And how do you kind of measure the return on investment?
So that's kind of a loaded question. From an ROI perspective, especially when looking at choosing a system, the key factors for me are scalability and impact. And impact usually encapsulates speed, right? So when I talk to a third-party vendor and they say, we've implemented this as fast as 3 months, I'm already knowing that this is probably about a 6-month process to do the implementation. But if it implements the appropriate automation, the right tools, what we're looking for in terms of what we laid out as a problem statement, and if it has the potential to scale, I'm willing to do that. And from a project management perspective, which is something that I'm very a strong believer in. I don't think I've worked in an organization where I haven't implemented project management. You lay out the timelines pretty well. So you hit certain milestones, you're looking for milestones, you're tracking the project, you're tracking the progress, and if things start to go sideways, you deal with them quickly. But if you lay out a plan that should take 6 months and on your 3rd month, it looks like it's going to take 8 or 9 months, then you might be dealing with bigger problems than you're capable of seeing. So,
I couldn't agree more.
Cool. Switching gears slightly, this industry has changed. It just changes so fast. And it seems to only be accelerating, right? And I think, even in the last 4 or 5 years, the sort of level of sophistication, the way these businesses have approached business has matured for sure. So I think that technology seems to follow that pattern. It seems to be kind of what we see, at least from our side. Can you guys talk a little bit about what you think the next generation is? I mean, where are we going? I know there are still operations out there that are using pen and paper, right? And they're getting to a place where they're probably getting more technological. What's sort of like the next step, do you think?
Well, I'm biased, but I have everything to be on e-com.
Well, I'm gonna agree with Katherine on that. For me, I think the future of just our industry as a whole is to really, for companies to operationalize themselves in such a way that they can scale. There's a mad focus on retail right now, which needs to be, because that's what we have in place right now. But the drive to open up multiple stores and expand the footprint can be dangerous if you also don't focus on the operations. For me, I think at the end of the day, it's better to become the Amazon of cannabis than say kind of the Tiffany's of cannabis, because really the future is going to be e-commerce. It's going to be delivery. It's going to be all based on operations. I believe the future model of cannabis is going to be around people ordering online and then having it delivered within a specific amount of time. I think it's a true importance for companies to begin to focus on how they can increase and do better with their supply chain, integrating with third parties, appropriately securing procurement in such a way so that it also becomes automated, so that basically the organism I earlier spoke about becomes a machine where an individual can place an order, and that order kicks off a series of triggers. So you get to a point where you have just-in-time inventory, where you can see some true revenue take place. I think the idea of delivery right now There's some companies out there that tend to own the customer, which I don't think is the right approach. I think from a delivery standpoint, there's some that do this ice cream truck model, which I also don't agree is the right approach. I think we're going to get to a point very soon where we're going to be looking at legalization, and people are going to be running really quickly and spending a lot of money to get their operations in place, which is something that they should be doing today, as opposed to focusing on opening multiple stores. But that's just my opinion.
Got it.
Absolutely.
Opinion.
I agree. And, you know, I think the silver lining of the situation that we're in right now for any companies that are able to capitalize on this, they're doing what's necessary to get their digital and online experience in place for that inevitable transition to a federally legal situation. You also have to take into consideration the history of cannabis. You know, regardless of how open-minded our country is for it today, there is still a little bit of a stigma. So, you know, if people can order online and get something delivered to them versus walking into a store where they might run into their neighbor, you know, there's definitely that appeal to it. And also historically, in an illegal situation, people are used to having some guy on a text message or a cell phone, or, you know, and having it delivered to them. So if you're trying to, instead of breaking a pattern to force people to walk into a retail location, why not kind of already lean into the habits that are already developed in that way? And you just get more data, you know, more actionable data when you go on to digital and e-com.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you depending more, Katherine, then on the data you all are sort of able to collect on your own, or do you look at these sort of third-party data, you know, consumer data type reports?
Yeah, good question. That's we have the benefit of operating in multiple states, so there are situations where there are still many holes in our data, or more than I would like. However, in other states that we operate in, we have a complete understanding of what's going on. So I'm able to kind of run internal case studies and match customer profiles and demographics and purchasing behavior in those states where there might be missing data, take the states where I've got a full picture and overlay it and make some assumptions on ROAS and ROI in those cases. I'm also using some of our different business operations to do further case studies when it comes to testing marketing initiatives. So for example, we have several different retail brands, but we also have several different standalone brands, product brands. And in states where we have our own owned retail locations, as well as the separate product brands, I'm able to do digital marketing tests where I can run a brand awareness campaign for that product and try to geo-target and drive foot traffic to our retail location where we are selling that branded product as well. And then we take that case study, and if it, you know, assuming it works, we go to our wholesale partners in other states and partner with them for other marketing initiatives. So that's another way that we're kind of leveraging the tech that we have available to us.
It's really interesting. My last question, and Katherine and Alfred, there are a couple questions in the Q&A. I don't know if you see them. If you feel like you'd like to respond to them, please do. But maybe over chat, because I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to move to pitches. But you know, we talked a little bit about the future. I wonder, how are you? And you know, Alfred said, you know, you feel like legalization is coming, right? But so much of where we're going, and there's this balance, right, between wanting to be competitive and sort of stay ahead of the game and be efficient and cutting edge, and also not really understanding where the regulations are going to go or what they might require, right? So how are you guys kind of like, how do you walk that line?
Well, for me, it's generally, especially because a lot of this is compliance driven, is to pick the hardest and the most difficult and use that as your baseline. So in preparation, I talked about this earlier, I think it's important for companies to not just look at state level compliance, but also SOX and HIPAA. So taking all those things into consideration, I think help establish a baseline from which you can work from. So you take some of the more complicated legalized states, you take their compliance baselines like Nevada, for example, and take states that aren't legal yet, and you just kind of really make it hard for yourself and come up with creative solutions that hopefully you'll scale in the future.
Yeah, I'll add that one of the benefits in working in really, really restricted markets is, like Alfred said, you get really creative, and it kind of forces you into certain channels of focus in a way. You know, I'm not able to do Facebook marketing. I'm not able to advertise on Bing. So that only leaves so many other opportunities for me. And it really, as I said, it focuses my efforts and allows me to test and iterate in those ways. And then when regulation opens up, it's like being a kid in a candy store. You're like, oh, okay, let's go. This is easy. We've already done the hard work.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm gonna sort of wrap us up here, and we're gonna move to some demos. But Alfred and Katherine, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I got a lot out of it. I hope our viewers did too. There are a couple questions in here. I don't know if you have a quick response over chat. You're welcome to do that, but I think when I move you, you're gonna lose them. So my apologies to everyone whose questions we didn't get to.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great to have you. Hopefully you'll both come back and do more with us in the future. So Patrick, I'm gonna kind of kick it back to you, and then I'm gonna get out of here. Get out of your get out of your space.
Fantastic. Get out of my ever-growing head of hair. It's a little out of control. Yeah, no, thank you, Celia, Katherine, and Alfred. It's a great panel. There are some good questions in there, questions around sort of the power dynamic between brands and retail, which I think is a real interesting new dynamic as brands try to break in and retail controls sort of that consumer relationship. I think the value, the partnership between technology companies and retail operators is ever more important than ever. So let's jump into our next phase. Next up, we have 3 CanopyBoulder Growth Incubator Demo Day presentations. These are going to be quick 5-minute presentations to introduce you to the companies, their founders, and the great traction they've achieved. Maybe you will want to learn more, and we encourage you to reach out directly to the teams. Maybe you know someone that they should present to, or an advisor who can lend a hand. Heck, maybe you want to join the team. We're open to all that. Don't hold back. All 3 of the presenting companies are in a growth phase and could use your help. So after 4 weeks in the program, the Growth Incubator program, they're ready to rock. So let's get to it. First up, joining us from Vancouver, British Columbia, is Amar Singh. Amar, welcome to the Demo Day presentations. Amar is the CEO and co-founder of Elevated Signals, which is the fastest growing cannabis tech company in Canada. Born out of the Creative Destruction Lab at the UBC, Elevated Signals offers software for quality-driven cultivation and processing teams. Down to the batch level, Elevated Signals can provide a very high level of management and interestingly, rapid compliance reporting for GMP manufacturers in Canada and soon all around the world. In the last year, Elevated Signals has, or just in this year, sorry, Elevated Signals has grown 10x. Amar, thank you for joining us. The stage is all yours.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. You hear me all right?
Sure can.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Amar. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Elevated Signals. And we make software that helps cannabis producers manage their operations, ensure compliance, and increase competitiveness. When we started out in the industry in 2016, we wanted to figure out what the biggest pain points were in cannabis production. So what did we discover? First of all, we found out that no one is happy with the performance of their first generation seed to sale software. They can't use the software to get a complete and accurate picture of what inventory they have on hand and where it is, the thing that it's supposed to be designed to do. And this has made it extremely stressful for teams to manually compile this information for their own work, let alone for inspectors. And this is important because regulators can slow them down, and it can make it hard for producers to get their product to market. Slowdowns cost money. The second problem we found is that these producers, cultivators and extractors have been doing a ton of work on paper, whiteboards, and spreadsheets because their seed to sale software doesn't handle anything to do with production quality tracking. So the producers we work with had been keeping all their critical batch records on paper binders, and these are often several hundred pages long, which exposes them to severe inefficiencies and regulatory risk. But more importantly, these records are their recipes, and it's the key to their brand promise of quality to their customers. Because if things aren't tracked, they get missed, and then the product suffers. If you're concerned about brand, you probably know that the Twitter sphere is not kind to low quality cannabis. The third problem that we discovered is that producers wanted to capture more information that would help them understand how to optimize and ultimately how to get the best yield and quality for the lowest cost, but they didn't have a way to effectively collect and organize all this data, let alone to analyze it, because the data, it's either stranded in paper or siloed in multiple systems. But to make matters worse, none of these problems are getting easier over time. Quality requirements are going up and regulations are becoming more complex. Margins are shrinking, labor is expensive, the market is getting more crowded by the minute, and it's hard to stand out. You see companies with once sky-high valuations now on the brink of bankruptcy, and COVID is complicating facilities on a number of fronts, making it harder for staff to do their work on site, to release product, and to quickly scale up. But the good news is that there are solutions, and the producers we work with are taking action today. When we started out, we partnered with forward-thinking companies like Tantalus Labs to build out what they and their peers told us they urgently needed. And this was to help address not only the pain points of today, but also to lay the foundation for the future needs of the industry. So we launched a product to market in 2019, and that solution is one that breaks down the walls between siloed inventory, quality, and environmental systems within cultivation and extraction to enable transparency, collaboration, and insight. The result is that our customers get their products to market faster, their audits are effortless, and they have happier customers because they have a more consistent and repeatable product. Elevated Signals is now deployed at over 20 facilities, including some of the top modern producers in Canada, such as Pure Sunfarms, Decibel, Rubicon Organics, Habitat Craft, Tantalus, and more. We've actually replaced 12 competitor installations at established cultivators this year alone, and we're not competing on price. But to Alfred's point earlier, we recognize that we operate in a technology and data ecosystem, and our philosophy from day one has been around collaboration. So we have an API, and we're actively integrating with ERPs and other software like QMS. We're not trying to do it all. But we currently have almost 4 million square feet of production space under management, which we're very proud of. But enough about us, let me talk more about our customers, and maybe we'll check out an example here of how producers work with us. So I'll give you an example of Ali, who's a quality assurance professional at a major Canadian producer. In order to guarantee a steady stream of safe and consistent product for her customers, she needs to perform a batch release before product is ready for sale. But prior to Elevated Signals, she would have to spend up to 10 hours every week chasing and filing paperwork into a batch record. Records from when the plants were started all the way through to packaging, and this takes them about 170 hours per month worth of administrative work that doesn't need to exist. With Elevated Signals, Ali doesn't need to do any of that. When her and her team complete tasks, the software collects and sorts the data automatically behind the scenes, helping them speed up quality assurance, government audits, and the release of products, all while helping them improve their quality and keep their promise to their customers. Here's what some of our customers are saying. So Mike from Pure Sunfarms says Elevated Signals is the best solution to help them have real-time visibility and continually optimize as they scale up. And Nikki from Habitat said we made them look really damn good in front of Health Canada. But I think the real proof is in the results that our customers have been achieving with the tools and the data that we're giving them. Pure Sunfarms achieved #1 sales in Ontario, which is the biggest market in Canada. Decibel is selling the highest price per gram in Canada. Habitat had the fastest sellout at their product launch, their first product launch. Tantalus has the #1 selling concentrate product in British Columbia, the home of BC Bud. And Rubicon Organics was awarded a supply agreement to Germany based on their goal of achieving EU GMP standards, which Elevated Signals is a key part of. So in closing, I'd like to say we're currently focused on Canada, but we're building some awesome US partnerships right now. So whether you're in Canada or the US, and if you're the type of producer who's relentless about getting the best quality product to market and you want to do this in a cost-effective and scalable way, we have a solution and we'd love to talk to you next. So please reach out to me at amar@elevatedsignals.com. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Amar. Great presentation. Let's move on to our next presenter from Brian Bauer, one of the co-founders of Abaca, is beaming in from Little Rock, Arkansas today, where before Abaca, he himself ran a fintech-focused business accelerator. So he's definitely made us step up our game, whether he knows it or not. And when it became clear that cannabis would legalize in the natural state of Arkansas, Brian and a number of other banking professionals and entrepreneurs in the area came together to provide, at least attempt to provide, and they now have successfully provided legitimate and stable banking solutions to the cannabis industry. Since then, they've successfully raised capital and launched into the Midwest and beyond, and are in the process of expanding nationally. Since we first invested in Abaca and started to work with them, they've doubled in size 6 times. Now, we're not claiming responsibility for that. That is fully on the team, and we're excited to have Brian join us and tell us more about Abaca. Brian, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Patrick. Can you see my screen?
Sure can. You look great.
All right, excellent. So thank you. Like Patrick said, I am Brian Bauer, one of the co-founders and the Chief Strategy Officer at Abaca, and we are Cannabis Banking Simplified. So does the cannabis industry have a banking problem? I think we all know the answer is yes, but some of the stats might actually surprise you. In fact, 75% of plant-touching operators actually have bank account access today. But if you're a multi-state operator, you might actually be managing more than a dozen different banking relationships. And some MSOs we talk to tell us that in some cases, they're delivering as many as 7 different financial reports to each one of these banks on a monthly basis because the bank's compliance problem has become your compliance problem. And in most cases, these banks or credit unions offer very limited services online because their technology is somewhat dated and it's not tailored to the cannabis industry needs. In many cases, you actually have to enter a branch in order to transact. And in some cases, you actually have to bring notarized documents with you. So how can you do business if it's so hard to transact? With Abaca's digital cannabis banking platform, we solve this. We're able to consolidate your finances into the only commercial banking solution built for cannabis, a single point of access to manage all of your finances. And we enable streamlined compliance by tying into your inventory technology, so you can stop sending all of those reports. And most importantly, we make it easy to transact online, so you can do business with your vendors and customers easily. Our platform is backed by reputable financial institution partners, enabling us to digitize the compliance process and connect financial services. So that way we can deliver to you, our business customers, robust financial services in a digital platform that's super easy to use. We serve the entire industry with tailored solutions for small business, single license operators, all the way up through MSOs and enterprise ancillary customers. And I want to address the Safe Banking Act because there's a lot of misconceptions here and we get this question a lot. So I wanted to take the opportunity to clarify. Safe banking, what it does is provide safe harbor to banks servicing the cannabis industry, and it directs bank regulatory agencies to provide uniform compliance guidance to those banks. But what it doesn't do is eliminate the bank's compliance obligation for serving cannabis, and it likely doesn't eliminate the payments problem, at least according to BISO. With that, let's show you Abaca. Our flagship product is the Abaca Compliant Banking Solution, which is a commercial banking solution built exclusively for cannabis. And you can see this in action on the right-hand side of your screen right now. It's a stable and transparent solution where each account is FDIC insured. And whether you're a single license operator with 1 account with us or an MSO with 10, you'll get a single view of your treasury across the organization. And best of all, you're going to be able to manage your finances online. And I even heard Alfred and Katherine reference this during the panel, so I want to point out that Abaca is actually SOC 2 compliant. Our newest product, though, is the Abaca Payment Exchange. And this has been built with a lot of input and collaboration from folks that we've spoken to through this Canopy Growth Incubator program. And it's an enterprise billing platform, so you can bill your wholesale customers electronically. It connects to your accounting system and enables payment management across your organization. It streamlines your accounts payable, accounts receivable, and the settlement reconciliation process. For ancillary businesses, we can even enable recurring credit card and debit card payments for you. Also, our stable Abaca Pay solution has your retail dispensary payment needs covered. Abaca enables customers to use their debit or ATM cards at the point of sale. We've actually conducted a study amongst our customers looking at 15,000 cash and cashless transactions, the cashless ones over Abaca Pay. What we found was customers will actually spend 25% more when paying through Abaca Pay. And we're also able to see a cash reduction at the dispensary level with this solution of nearly 40%. So we're available in 8 states and growing for plant touching operators, and for ancillary businesses, we're available nationwide. To date, we've taken more than 100 million cannabis deposits, and Abaca has also been recognized by both cannabis and also financial services industry publications. We invite you to join us on our journey to bring the future of financial services to the cannabis industry. And when you work with Abaca, you're in good company. Our founding team has deep expertise in financial services, fintech, and financial regulation. And Abaca's fast-growing team has the breadth and depth of expertise that will help us continue to deliver best-in-class financial solutions to the cannabis industry. So why Abaca? Talk to your CFO or accounting team about us, and I bet when you do, they'll find it interesting that our streamlined compliance will save you time from filing all those reports. They'll really like the fact that Abaca compliant banking makes life easier and enables your users to gain a better view of cash assets across the organization and manage finances online. They're going to get really excited when they find out about the Abaca payment exchange and how that means you'll get paid faster and make accounting reconciliation simple. But you're absolutely going to blow them away when you tell them that Abaca can actually consolidate their banking services across multiple states, so you can finally put an end to wasting so much time managing your finances. To get started, you can email me directly at brian@goabaca.com, or you can apply and get set up online at goabaca.com. So you can finally go back to taking your bank account for granted with Abaca. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. The why Abaca slide gets me every time. I think it really kind of wraps up the feelings people have, at least the controllers and the CFOs, when they start learning about Abaca, and sort of maybe a testament to all the great stuff that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick, and thanks to Canopy for putting this program on. It's been great.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Okay, last but not least, we have Matt Mayberry joining us. Matt is the CEO and one of the co-founders of Trym. He's currently on the road with his family as they zigzag across the Pacific Northwest, dodging wildfire smoke. Trym is a cannabis farm management platform founded in California and finding great interest from the California market and across the country for their task management and scheduling suite of features. In fact, the Trym team has doubled sales in the last 6 months, and I'm excited to have Matt join us to present Trym to you today. Matt, it's all yours. Let's see, so we can see your screen, but we can't see you or hear you yet.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yep, it's all yours. You look great. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks for the intro, Patrick. We're calling in from the now sunny Oregon coast. So I'm Matt. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Trym, and we build software that helps cannabis cultivators manage and scale their businesses. So as the industry has grown, so has the scale of cultivation businesses. In fact, the majority of businesses are now over 10,000 square feet. In addition to that, 80% of growers say they're planning to expand their business this year, and 23% say they're going to expand to greater than 80,000 square feet. So managing a craft grow can easily be done with a team of less than 10. But when you talk about managing a grow of 80,000 square feet or more, you need an organizational structure that is much more sophisticated. With more plants means more people, and unfortunately that also means more problems. If you don't have the tools and the processes in place to manage that team, it's going to be chaos. When we talk to growers that come in and are interested in using Trym, we often ask how things are going on their farm and why they're interested in Trym. And the common response that we get is, well, down on the farm, it's a clusterfuck. So in addition to that, to make matters worse, labor is the #1 operational expense that cannabis growers have. It accounts for nearly 50% of their overall expenses. What that also means is it's the #1 opportunity area when you look at improving your business and reducing costs. And that's exactly why we built Trym. We know how hard it is to actually manage a business, and we know how challenging it is trying to manage a business in the regulated cannabis industry. We also know that for you to be successful, you need to run a very tight ship. So what does that actually mean? It means that you have the tools and the processes in place to manage your business successfully. It means that your managers know what your team is doing. It means that your team knows what they need to do and how to do it. And it means that owners and executives know how the team is tracking to organizational objectives. The stakes are exceptionally high. And disorganization can lead to a whole slew of problems that put your business at risk. And unfortunately, if you're not running a tight ship, you're running a sinking one. Operators say that the #1 concern that they have is increased competition and decreased prices. This is where Trym comes in. We help you improve productivity, gain visibility into what's happening, and increase efficiency. Let's take a look at a few ways that we're helping some of the leading cultivators in the US manage their operations and streamline things. The task management system in Trym allows you to architect the exact way that you want your plants to be grown. All you have to do is put together a workflow, which is just a series of tasks, and then you assign that workflow to plants as you plant them. We've taken the tedious nature of managing your team and made it as simple as set it and forget it. This allows your managers to now spend less time micromanaging and actually focus on what's important to grow your business. Those tasks that you assign to those plants automatically show up on your employees' phones. Each morning they get a push notification that tells them what they need to do, and then they track their time as they execute the work. Now you'll know what's being done, what's already been completed, and what needs to be done tomorrow that didn't get done today. We also help streamline the actual processes that your team uses. As an example, we know that harvesting is one of the most time-consuming tasks that your team performs. That's why we created touchless harvesting. It's just one example of how we help your operation run more effectively. All you have to do is scan a plant tag, the weight is automatically registered from a scale, and then the app moves on to the next plant automatically without your gardener ever having to use their sticky fingers that are covered in trichomes to touch a screen or a keyboard. Once that harvest is complete, you can check out the results in our harvest analytics. You can see how it stacks up versus other harvests that you've completed. We give you a full report that lets you see the environmental conditions that it was exposed to, the weights that you recorded, and then also the days that it spent in all the different various growth phases, as well as all of the tasks that were ever completed on it. Don't just take my word for it though. We're saving our customers real time. Happy Valley, which is one of the largest cultivators in Massachusetts, is saving 23 hours a week just using Trym. That's equal to $30,000 in labor every year. Think about what you could do in your facility if you had 23 extra hours each week. And think about the improvements that you can make with that time. Happy Valley is not an isolated case. We're working with leading cultivators nationwide. And these are small craft growers all the way through to MSOs like Cresco Labs. We're in 14 different states, and we're working with millions of square feet of cultivation space. All of these businesses are using Trym to streamline their operations and scale effectively. In addition to our incredible partners, we also have an awesome team that's passionate about the industry. And we've got an amazing background in both tech and cannabis. We're helping you with all of the challenges that you have across your entire operation. And if you want to learn more, it's really easy to get started. All you have to do is request a demo at trym.io, or you can even reach out to me directly at matt@trym.io. Really appreciate your time today. Looking forward to hearing from you, and thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Matt. Great presentation. Super exciting to see all three of these companies moving forward so aggressively we run the growth incubator, and we always are very sensitive to making sure that the companies are doing well and we're helping them. And it sounds like a few of them are having their best months ever. So thank you to all of the mentors, right, who have been helping the teams with sales, marketing, and growth. Thank you to all of the CanopyBoulder investors that are supporting CanopyBoulder and making these investments into the companies. And thank you to all the outside investors who have committed capital to these companies along their journeys and enabled them to become, actively growing operations, really serving specific and valuable needs in the industry. It's great to see companies flourish when times are tough. It actually makes investing easier. And, if you're on the call or on the Zoom here today and you're curious about what any of these companies are doing, I would absolutely encourage you to reach out. These are names and companies and problems being solved that are going to be around for a good long time. And we're excited about everyone's future. I also want to thank all the industry professionals who are joining us, who are curious and interested in what is not only happening on the demand side and comparing themselves to other operators and what they're thinking about when it comes to cannabis and technology, but they may also be interested in what some of the cutting edge technologies are and what's actually working in ancillary products and services tech in the cannabis industry. I'm sure you're also very interested in what the future holds. So let's transition to our keynote Q&A with Alan Brochstein. I think we're going to have Alan join us here just right now. I'm going to do my little intro for Alan as he comes on. So what is Alan Brochstein thinking about when he thinks about the future of the cannabis industry? Many of you know Alan Brochstein. I'm a huge fan. You should be a huge fan. If you don't, I'd encourage you to go over to 420investor.com and New Cannabis Ventures and see what some of the things he's created look like. But he is a luminary, a thought leader in the cannabis industry. And I know he's always thinking about what's going on and how things work. He's also thinking about, with a lot of the companies that are covered in his sort of sphere, quarterly reports and what's happening right now, what just happened. So we're excited to take him out of that sort of day-to-day near-term thinking and analysis and sort of give him a chance to broaden his thought process. So we're going to talk about what should we all be preparing for the post-COVID-19 cannabis environment, how each of the major global markets could pan out. And to cap things off, we're going to dive into this sort of often discussed but rarely unpacked topic of the cannabis industry's future. So let's just check here. And we've got Alan on. Great to have you, Alan. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Patrick. And that was very uplifting to listen to those 3 presentations. Really exciting.
Yeah, no, thanks. I'm sure you see it every day. The companies in the industry, some are thriving, some are surviving, and some, we're concerned with. So, for us, it's exciting to be working with companies that are definitely doing really well and thriving. So let's talk about the future. Let's talk about the pandemic. This COVID-19 thing, it's been, really bad and in some ways really good for different sectors in the world. Certainly for the cannabis industry in the United States, being defined as an essential business, has been really positive. In the beginning of the pandemic, what were your thoughts on who would survive and how things would play out? And have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, well, let me say, first of all, that, these kinds of potholes that I like to describe come up all the time, but who would have ever imagined coming out of the vaping crisis that we would walk into this? And, this was not a cannabis industry problem. This is a global problem, and something in my 7 years of the industry, I haven't had to deal with that at all. So this was virgin territory. And, my initial thoughts, Patrick, were, and I advised people, whether at 420 Investor in my weekly newsletter at New Cannabis Ventures, to migrate to quality. Go to the companies that you think have the staying power, because we were already facing extinction just from the tail end of the vaping crisis, and this could have been a death blow. So my initial thoughts were upgrade your quality, move into the largest MSOs. If there's any doubt about the survivability of the company, this is not the time to be taking that chance. And that was right for a couple of months anyway.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting to see how COVID-19 has shifted a focus onto quality execution. And I think, all the companies that we're pitching, Trym, Elevated Signals, Abaca, they're focused on, driving a really high quality business and executing more efficiently and effectively than ever. Alan, now that we've had this sort of COVID-19 has sort of pushed the industry over a hump towards technology. Do you expect some of these shifts in pre-order delivery or order ahead delivery technology to stick, or do you think that we will see a movement back to sort of more analog processes?
Okay, that's a softball because there's no way we're going back, and that's been one of the most gratifying things of this crisis is that a little bit Darwinian, but out of the ashes we're seeing some great things happen. And you mentioned earlier essential services, and that gave, I think, both on the demand side as well as on the supply side, it really encouraged everybody. On the demand side, consumers like, wait, my favorite restaurant's closed, but I can go to my cannabis store. There's a mind shift there that's phenomenal, and it was a real validation. But certainly for the operators and investors in the industry, this was great news that to get deemed essential. And so there were big changes that had to take place immediately, and it was easier for some of the larger, better funded, more advanced companies to make that jump. They were already able to do some of these digital things in some markets, but when it opened up across the board, the regulators liked it. It went without a hitch. So as you mentioned, we just came out of quarterly filings. I'm listening, and every single call that I'm listening to, the companies are adapting. And I was talking to somebody building out his franchise in Florida, and he's scaling up stores right now, just a few, building up more. And he talked about how COVID has really coincided with his new design, which is he thinks it's permanent. And I agree that they're not going to take away curbside pickup and delivery where it's been put in place. And so he has a smaller interior, a little bit more space on the outside for that customer interface, just as an example. But, I think this was a really big deal to be able to shop like you shop at Amazon. Everybody, whether you're an illicit market consumer or a legal market consumer, knows what Amazon is and appreciates that experience, or one of the other sites like that. And it hasn't been the case for cannabis. And, on these calls, people are always trying to figure out which legal operators competing with which other legal operator, but that's rarely the case. It's really that we have this long entrenched market, unfortunately, because cannabis has been illegal so long, and it's outside of regulation and taxation, and that's the competition. And so they're a little bit handicapped when it comes to this Amazon-like experience. They're not really able to go digital or they'll get caught. We're already seeing Weed Maps get in trouble yet again for what they're doing online up in Canada, been in trouble in California. So, with all these entities wanting to make sure that the cannabis is taxed and regulated, and the enforcement's going to keep up. So improve the customer experience is probably a more important thing. And that's been the case, Patrick. And I expect that's, there's some other aspects that are going on. I want to call out. So you mentioned Abaca, and I don't know them that well, and I haven't heard their name come up on the calls. And actually, a lot of times these names don't come up, but names like Hyper or CanPay, and there's some others out there that are enabling e-commerce, really. And so it's not exactly like Amazon, because they're not just going to throw it over your gate or put it in your mailbox or whatever it is. They can't. An adult has to be there to sign for it, but it's coming closer and closer to that experience now, and I think it's here to stay.
Yeah, it's interesting how you cite the technology that the legal operators are using as a means to distance themselves from the illicit market. I hadn't really thought too much about the illicit market because we just don't think about the illicit market with our companies. But I do see that and agree with you, is that sort of an after effect or some sort of effect of licensed businesses engaging with technologies that consumers that make their businesses run more efficiently and that they can legally engage with. And a company like Abaca or Elevated Signals or Trym, they're only wanting to work with licensed operators. That technological advantage, I think, will help create some bit of a gap between
Yeah, and I don't know if you work like with customer loyalty programs. There's all sorts of software out there that's really making it a more pleasurable activity for the buyers. I don't think the illicit market has frequent flyer points or whatever it is. So it's really hard to compete. I mean, let's face it, the regulated industry is not as experienced when it comes to quality, and there's a learning curve there, and it's getting better. There's the tax part, obviously. But at least on this part, on the customer experience and being able to pay, without cash necessarily, these are great differentiation points going forward.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of the markets. So Canada, at the beginning of when New Cannabis Ventures was launching, it was a lot of the articles and the coverage was about the Canadian licensed producers. So we've kind of gone through an interesting cycle with Canada. What are your predictions, or what does the future look like for you when you're thinking about the Canadian cannabis market?
Yeah, I got to tell you, my wife and I used to toast every time we'd have a glass of wine. We'd toast Canada. I mean, Canada was great for me, for anybody in this industry, really, for companies in the United States to go public. It all was because of what happened up in Canada. And I have to tell you, as somewhat of a contrarian, I feel like people have totally written off Canada. And I can understand, how they're arriving at that conclusion. But I think the future there is good, not great, but good, and not terrible, which is the way it's been. And for those maybe not familiar with what happened up there, obviously there was all the hype and I used to have an adage, the Canadian licensed producers grow their cash balances better than they can grow cannabis. And that was certainly the case. So, what you had up there, we've seen it south of the border as well. We've seen in California, when you legalize and you don't have points of distribution, it's a problem. And compound it by, if you legalize and you only have flower, really, it's a problem because half the market is non-flower, and the illicit market, they're just going to sell that all day long. So it's been a huge, well-documented problem in Canada. I don't mean to beat on a dead horse, but just yesterday, finally, Ontario said they're going to open up 40 stores a year. So right now, if you look at the 40 a month. If you look at the 4 most populous provinces up there that account for the bulk of the population, that'd be, I always forget the order, but certainly Ontario is the biggest. And you also have Alberta, BC, and Quebec. So in those 4 markets, Quebec is terrible. There's no private retail there, and there's not enough stores. But Alberta is extremely saturated, so nobody can complain about Alberta. It's a free-for-all there now. But Ontario, way, way underpenetrated, and BC as well. BC's got some more challenges because it has a real entrenched cannabis culture that can't stand the illicit market. But why is it going to get better? Well, first of all, some of the structural problems in Canada have started to dissipate, and that would be overbuilding. So we're seeing write-offs of many large production facilities. Too many companies, we're seeing them shut down, and too much inventory, we're seeing it written off. And so that's a good first step. It doesn't mean that they're out of the woods on that front, but this Cannabis 2.0, in other words, the derivative products, is a real chance for these companies to build brands. You can't build a brand on flower. Nobody does it really in the United States. Flower's flower. Every store has their own. There's a few brands out there, but that's not where the brand building takes place. And it's just too substitutable. So I think Canada's headed towards a much more robust market. And, a lot of people who are in the illicit market can't stand the LP market, and that'll always be the case to some degree. But there's been a big change there with dramatically lower pricing due to what they call value pricing, large formats. It's getting these people into the stores finally. The people that are long experienced consumers of cannabis that use a lot of cannabis. And what I hear is happening, and this is why I get optimistic, is that when they go into the stores, they are attaching other products that are the Cannabis 2.0 products. These Cannabis 2.0 products are just getting started. So as I look out a couple of years, right now that market's growing at what I would characterize as 100% a year rate, and it can probably double for the next 2 years, something like that. And that doesn't all go to the LPs. They have horizontal operations. It's not vertically integrated there, but a lot of retailers as well. So I see these retailers doing fairly well. There'll be consolidation there. And I think for anybody that's looking at Canada, I think you have to understand how important retail is when you have a relatively new market, as you do in Canada, where you're trying to get not your mainstream cannabis consumer who's been consuming for a while, but trying to expand the market. In a place like Canada, where the advertising is so restrictive and the packaging restrictions so high, these retailers play a great role. So I would say to anybody listening today, there's way too much focus on canopy growth and not enough on companies that that maybe are operating at a smaller level, and also the retailers, which canopy growth, and they're doing well there.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think you make a great point with the sort of slowed or delayed rollout of retail locations. And we know that when stores open, demand just appears, right?
Yep.
And sales happen. And, I know in Canada, like the US and the different states of the United States, they've tried to figure out how to roll these things out. It's start, stop, lawsuits here and there. It never goes as quickly as you'd imagined,
right?
Or even the regulators and the state officials or the government officials imagine. So it's just, putting that into your equation, your timeline for investment, and understanding that, with more stores opening and these 2.0 products coming online, Canada still has a very good and strong, bright future. So switching, one of the things that comes up with some of the Canadian companies is Europe. And they look to the export opportunities in Europe. Alan, what are your thoughts on the future of the cannabis industry in Europe?
Yeah, well, it's funny, just to hit on that point, export. Whenever I hear about international operations, it's always about exporting. Who wants to import? There actually are some places that want to import, but for the most part, this is, I think, one of the red herrings that people need to be very careful about these assumptions about exporting, because, a lot of whether it's provinces or countries, states, it might be in the future, not right now, they want to protect their jobs, and so they might not want imports. So this is something I think to watch. And I also want to caveat that I don't focus that much on Europe yet. I think, obviously those markets have some great characteristics that they've been slow to develop. So Germany kind of sets the pace, and Germany has, the problem there is the doctors aren't really on board yet. But the good news is they have distribution in pharmacies like Walgreens, which is, makes it ubiquitous on the distribution side. And the other really cool news is that insurance pays for it. So it's treated like a pharmaceutical, pari passu. So this is a very promising, but it's just been so slow to develop regulatory hurdles. And like I said, what made Canada's medical program take off was when they finally had doctor buy-in. So I have to admit, I'm not following it that closely, and I do pay attention to Tilray, Canopy Growth, Aurora. Kronos is focused on Israel, and it's kind of funny, back to that point of exports, they made an investment in with a joint venture partner, a kibbutz in Israel, and they were originally pitching this as an export project. Be there in Israel, take advantage of low costs and IP, and export into the EU. Well, now it's changed, and it's going to be for the local market, which I found kind of interesting. But these large companies, I don't know if I said AFRIA, but basically your 5 large Canadian LPs, plus maybe a handful of other ones. Like I know Organigram just got an export deal into Israel, but these companies have operations. They've scaled them back a little bit, and it's tough because I think they realize they're capital constrained. The capital's not flowing as freely for them, and they have large operating losses. And I think they had bigger plans historically, and I think they also appreciated this. You got to have it on the ground as opposed to just shipping it from Canada. So it's a little bit tricky. As I would say, there's other geographies. I don't know if we're going to talk about them, but all these geographies, they're exciting, but at the same time, very tricky. And there's a new company, well, I don't know how new the company is, but relatively new, called Clever Leaves. And I'm trying to get to understand them better. We're going to be interviewing them at New Cannabis Ventures soon. And I've been following them peripherally. The reason I bring them up, they seem to have a real international focus exclusively, and they're about to list on the NASDAQ through a SPAC merger. So this is an area where I think as a future person, I'd say it's going to get really interesting. Maybe I'm late. I don't think so, but maybe. But this is, I think, given the large populations and some of these favorable dynamics, this is something we ought to be paying attention to.
You know, global is a big opportunity just by the nature of it. But I think, you know, what you're saying to some degree is that investors and industry players should, you know, think about global opportunities, and they are large, but then dig right in and try to understand the subtlety and the nuance of those markets, like specifically Germany, which, like you said, the doctors haven't necessarily bought in yet, though you have the insurance and the distribution in pharmacies. You know, the other thing is, you know, Germany has a long history of herbal medicine, and a lot of the herbs and botanicals that we buy at the natural food store, ginkgo, echinacea, those are also reimbursed in Germany. And they have production and experience and, you know, extraction and a lot of IP and businesses homegrown there that supply that German market. So yeah, I think you're right. Export can sound good, but, you know, is how much of that, how large is that target addressable market gonna be? And then, you know, will they compete with domestic suppliers as well? In a country like Germany, I fully expect the domestic market to spool up relatively quickly when the regulators allow and there's the will to, like you said, you know, support economic development in the nation and not sort of just, you know, send money to another country like Canada when they could, you know, be making investments and keeping the capital in Germany. I think there's definitely a nationalistic sort of movement with economies all around the world. We're going to see that probably play out in Europe and elsewhere.
I think so. And I guess when I think about it, what I'll be looking at in the future is not only who has assets on the ground, because I think it will be important, but also these relationships. So that's one of the things I want to learn more about, kind of the strength of the relationships that, like Clever Leaves and maybe some of these other LPs like Canada that are kind of trying to put these networks together. Because you know, it's not going to be as simple as we're just shipping straight to the pharmacy from Colombia or from Canada or Australia or whatever it is.
If we look at the recent history of those relationships between businesses, which seem transactional, often there's something, and there can be more control provisions behind the scenes that we, you know, are important to unpack to understand that. I think that's very wise, Alan. Okay, so let's move from Canada to Europe, back to the motherland, the United States. So, you know, it's been a wild ride. You know, what are your predictions for the United States? You know, market-wise,
Sure.
Legalization-wise, what are your expectations?
So, Patrick, if we were having this conversation when I met you back in 2014, I would have said, I don't think we'll be legal within 5 years, which would have been last year. And we weren't, and we weren't even close. And I think right now it's tricky, which I'll explain in a minute. But I think, first of all, I always like to tell investors that you got to be careful what you wish for. A lot of people mistakenly believe that if you're investing in a large MSO in the United States, that you're making an implicit bet on legalization, when in fact, you may be making the exact opposite bet, depending on how it plays out. Let me give you an example. You go buy GTI or Curaleaf because you think once it's legal in the United States, they're just going to start shipping across all the state lines and ramp it up, scale up even more. They've done a great job with their hands tied behind their back. But, you know, when I hear presidential candidate Biden, you know, endorse federally legal medical cannabis, all of a sudden I start hearing, ooh, Schedule 2 or Schedule 3 or Walgreens. And so, you know, anybody that wants legalization better understand it may not be on their own terms. There are a lot of interesting things that could come up, such as on the distribution side. I'm very sensitive to the social equity topic, and I've been watching Congress. This is typically a state level or local level topic. It's a tough one to get solved properly. It's one we need to solve as an industry. But when I hear at the House Banking Committee, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you know, bringing this up in a banking committee meeting to talk about safe banking, it makes me, you know, really a little bit cautious on how things could play out. So the good news is this. So I think status quo will persist, and it could, when it comes to investing or operating, I think everybody wants to know that the rug's not going to pull out from under us. That happened in 2018 when the Cole memo was rescinded overnight. We had been worried about it for a year, so it wasn't exactly overnight, but it was literally 3 days after California legalized that Jeff Sessions said, nope, that deal's off, and without saying what the new deal was. So everybody, you know, how do you invest? How do you grow when you don't know if the feds are going to be knocking on your door the next day? So I think the great news is we don't appear headed back in that direction. So status quo has been incredible. We're seeing companies that are building scalable franchises, generating free cash flow, and on track for 500 million or more in revenue this year and $1 billion or more next year or the following year. So status quo is working fine. It has a lot of problems. So it all comes down, I think, to how great the near term turns out to be. I think we'll get a taste in November. If the Democrats take the Senate, then I think it opens the door, not to legalization, and I'll get back to that in a moment, but into something I think is better than legalization. I call it rationalization of federal policy. And what do I mean by that? So right now, there's all these things that are not only stupid, but they're dangerous. The fact that the industry typically has to operate nearly in all cash. That's getting a little bit better, by the way, but typically there's a lot of cash, and that can be, dangerous. And it also leads to underpayment of taxes, all sorts of negative issues. And that's the kind of thing they can improve. And as part of financial reforms, I would love to see this. I can't promise it'll happen, but to be able to, back to that Amazon analogy, everybody wants to just, get their points and use their MasterCard or Visa. And, there's no reason that you can't right now, except that MasterCard and Visa are, multi-$100 billion operations, and they don't want to get shut down over something like that. So that doesn't happen. So if they get a safe harbor, if banks get a safe harbor, we could see deposits and lending maybe take place. And then maybe one of the biggest ones that would help with growth capital for this industry would be similar to Visa and MasterCard. The New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, it's not illegal for them to list these companies, but it's impractical. And there, I would hope with a Democratic Senate that's really, so the way I look at the politics right now, most politicians at least warmly embrace cannabis. There aren't that many that are really against it. They tend to be in the Republican Party, and they're not the majority. So with a little bit of a change, right now the problem hasn't been so much the Republican senators, it's been the Republican Senate leadership that's impeded some of these reforms. So I don't think we're gonna get legalization, and the point I wanted to make was Canada, in 2015, Justin Trudeau ran on a platform of legalization, and they already had a federally legal medical cannabis program. You would have thought that they would have been able to get this thing cracking pretty quickly. Now, maybe Canadians move a little more slowly, but I don't think that's the answer. I think for the United States, it is going to be very complex. And you have some states like Colorado, where you are, that generate massive amounts of tax revenue. And they're going to have to figure this out. They're going to have to figure out social equity, whether they're not, whether interstate commerce will be permitted, what kind of will there be federal regulation, or will it all be at the states? I think because of this, we'll get some of these easy fixes first. And by the way, another easy fix that's necessary is medical research. You can't do medical research right now without running a risk of losing your federal funding. So if you're a state institution. So that's my outlook, that we're not, and a lot of people are going to get excited if we get a Democratic Senate, and then they're going to be not so excited. They should stay excited, because it's not about legalization right now. I think this is also not, we're talking about from the business standpoint, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say, I think we'll also see a lot more decriminalization. And that's not the same thing as legalization of commercial production, all that. It's essential and necessary. I hope that we get a federal law that immediately decriminalizes it, but I don't think that's going to just give open season, like we see in CBD, by the way, for people to start making THC products for sale.
You mentioned how long it has taken in Canada to move forward. I think, if we think in the United States, we can do it better and faster. We have that sort of, inherent confidence. Some might call it arrogance. Maybe we should take a look at how hemp legalization is coming along in CBD. I mean, it's not happening overnight. There's a lot of agencies that have to plug in and give their contribution to the legalization and regulation effort. And there are a lot of opportunities for outside players to come in and exert their influence on the process. So I think for folks in the THC business, the cannabis industry, they need to pay good attention to what's happening with CBD and legalization there to sort of understand what they should expect. Because it ain't moving fast, and there's a lot of concern and a lot of anxiety about where we'll get to. There's no better time now than to get involved in the process and make sure you're sending comments in, you're actively participating, that you're supporting the organizations that are advocating for the industry, and that you understand, like you said, what does legalization actually look like? Don't expect anyone to sign a document in the future on the federal level, and it's going to be free market, interstate commerce, everything gets solved with
all next year.
All next year. No, I don't think that's going to happen.
So Patrick, but on the broader picture on legalization, we hit federal and everybody's all focused on that, but really what drives the industry is state and local, and people don't talk about the local so much. So I'm going to start there. One of the biggest problems you mentioned earlier, I think Massachusetts being so slow to roll out. I think I mentioned California being problematic. And if you think about what the issues are, people like to bring up taxes. That's not the issue. I mean, you can't have these programs without taxes. That's not politically palatable. But what's the real problem? It's the same as the Canadian problem. It's distribution. And so there's so much not in my backyard going on in many places where there's local opt-out. But the pandemic has led to high levels of unemployment and has depleted tax revenue for cities and counties, higher expenses, lower tax base. So that's going to help. But the state level is probably more important, because that's what really drives a lot of the business. And so everybody should be aware. A big ballot initiative this year in New Jersey in November, and expected to pass. I think it's a little challenging because that state is a medical state, but it's really in its early days. So it's not going to be quite like Illinois, which is ramped up real fast, but still New Jersey and the influence it might have on its nearby neighbors, all of which are talking about legalizing. And this would, probably put some pressure on them as well, because their residents are going to drive to New York and to New Jersey. So, and then there's also Arizona, which is a mature market, which has also the advantage of lots of points of distribution and unrestricted canopy. So this is going to be a market. It's a big tourist market too in better days. And they'll just be able to turn the switch. So I think this is what's really exciting, that states are moving forward one by one with a lot in the queue and a lot of momentum right now, Patrick.
Cool. Hey, to wrap up, we've got a lot of folks who are working in licensed cannabis businesses on this call right now. At a high level, Alan, what would you recommend that they focus on? What do you think will be rewarded in the long term for cannabis businesses in the United States?
Yeah, well, so one thing I like is like those three companies earlier, I think ancillary opportunities are really where companies can distinguish themselves. But for those, to your question, that are in the license space, I hear it broken down into different segments that are typically the same across company. Everybody will say, oh, I don't want to really be a cultivator. I do it now because I have to. Some people say, I don't really want to be a retailer, but I do it now because I have to. It's a new market. So some companies that have large production footprints in a new state will open retail, even though they say that's not really where they want to be. There's distribution as well. And then everybody wants to be a brand, of course. I never hear anybody say, I don't want to be a brand. So I think is a little bit of a contrarian, and not to slight that, Cresco has, they explicitly say they want to focus on distribution and brands. And the first thing I say is focus on what you think you're going to be best at. You don't have to be vertically integrated. One of the weird things about the way things have rolled out, you're in Colorado, you used to have to be vertically integrated. They had these shotgun weddings before legalization, before medical cannabis, to force them together. You have some states like Florida where everything you sell, you have to grow yourself, which is silly. So I would just say be open-minded to, over time, that we're going to see less and less vertical integration. There are very few businesses out there. Like I like wine, and I don't go to my producer's wine store and buy it. I do sometimes if I happen to be traveling to a certain part of the country. That's fun, but day to day, that's not the way it works. Or if you drink alcohol, you don't go to the Jack Daniel's store to buy your Jack Daniel's or whatever you drink. So I would say to the operators out there, figure out what you're going to be good at, and don't rule out cultivation. I hear everybody just say cultivation's not the deal. There are some companies out there that are, and if you think about the future, when you do get interstate commerce, those companies right now that can go into a state, like I'm watching Flower One in Nevada, and I'm wishing the best for them. I think it'll work out. They have a really interesting business model where they're focused on basically a turnkey solution to the brands. So making the product and getting it to the stores. And so that's what I would say to a licensed operator. Pick your spot. Don't get sucked into the vertical integration mistake that many people are going to make ultimately. And I think retail is over time going to be a great spot. And people say, retail is terrible, it's going to all go online. Okay, that's fine. I didn't say just build bricks and mortar stores. Build your e-commerce out where you can. So that's what I would say to people, Patrick.
Great. Well, Alan, this has been fantastic. Really fascinating to sort of open things up and unpack the future with you. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for including me, Patrick. Stay well.
And I would encourage everyone if they are not receiving the new Cannabis Ventures e-newsletter, or they are not familiar with 420 Investor, that it is a fantastic, those two sites are fantastic resources for anyone who is analytical and trying to understand and make sense of everything that's going on in the cannabis industry. I read the newsletter religiously, and I think everyone else should. So get over there, sign up, support Alan and everything that he's doing, because he is sort of cutting through the noise, the clutter, and trying to find that signal, that we're all searching for on what's working right now, who's doing good, and who should be supported. So Alan, great work.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Stay well.
Cool. All right. And with that, we have come to the end of today's proceedings. If you have questions about the companies that pitched, make sure to reach out to those founders directly. If you don't know how to get in touch with them, reach out to me, Patrick at CanopyBoulder, or Celia at CanopyBoulder, and we'll make sure to connect you with them. We have a lot of resources for entrepreneurs. We have a lot of resources for investors. And as a result, we have a lot of resources for licensed businesses in our portfolio. So go on over to CanopyBoulder.com, search out the portfolio page, look up who's in the network. And if you have any interest in Abaca, Trym, Elevated Signals, or any of the other 100 or so companies that we've invested in that are supporting the industry, please let us know. We want to connect you with them and help solve some of these major problems that everybody is facing in the industry. I want to thank Celia, who's done a masterful job pulling this together. I want to congratulate the 3 teams. Thank you, Celia. The 3 teams and the CEOs. They did a really great job as well. And thank you all for giving us some time to pull this together and serve you. Celia, any final remarks?
I think you said it best. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And yeah, there's more to come. So stay in touch.
Last thing, if you want to become a CanopyBoulder mentor and you want to become part of the community, please do go to CanopyBoulder.com. You roll down to the bottom of the page, and there's an opportunity for you to reach out to us and get involved helping these companies that we're investing in, provide better solutions to the industry's challenges going forward. So with that, thank you, Celia. Thank you, all the teams. Thank you, everybody attending, and stay healthy and safe out there, okay? Bye-bye.